Welcome. This is the Fixing the Foundations of Relationships webinar. Unfortunately, I forgot to push the record button, so this is a re-recording, but I will make sure that you get everything that we discussed in that session. So I'm going to share my screen right now, and my mouse cooperates, and we'll start the webinar. So what I asked people to do was to contemplate this question here, which is to think about what you think the single most important thing is that needs to be fixed in relationships today. And while you're thinking about that question, I'd like you to look around your environment, and I want you to choose 3 objects, kind of hand-sized objects, kind of ready to hand kind of things. One is going to represent you, one is going to represent your partner. It could be a current partner, it could be an ex-partner. And the third item is going to represent the relationship between you. So while you're contemplating this question, what is the single most important thing that needs to be fixed in relationships today? I'd like you to go around and find those objects. And you can pause the video right now and go find those objects for yourself if you'd like, and then come back. So what people said in the chat, people said things like healthy communication and conflict transformation and repair. There's a rupture. Another person said communication again. Someone else said the most important thing is to realize we're on the same bus. We're not enemies. Someone said a sense of humor, which is important. Intimacy. Another person said being present with each other, to understand how I feel, to be curious, and communication and kindness. So those were the kinds of things that people thought were important. And I will tell you that most people come to couples counseling and the thing that they say is we want to improve our communication. We need better communication. And when you unpack that, what you find out is what they really mean is, if only my partner understood my point of view and agreed with me, everything would be fine. And of course, the other partner feels the same way. So communication is often a symptom of things that are going on in relationships, but it isn't necessarily some of the deeper problems that are driving the problem. So I wanted to take a look at the foundations, like what is the foundation that modern relationships are sitting in. And as I did a little bit of research into that, I realized that we've kind of had a revolution in relationships. It kind of quietly been happening in the background, but it's really had an impact on the way that we think of relationship these days. If you go back to the 1950s, we see that people had very strong gender-based roles. The man was the breadwinner and the woman was the homemaker and took care of the house. There was a social and often religious expectation that people would get married. Like that was the goal of relationship, was that you were going to get married. And divorce was stigmatized. So you were not encouraged to have divorces, and to be a divorcee was to be a little scandalous. Personal goals were often sublimated to the marriage. A woman might have wanted to pursue education or career, but she would often become a homemaker, or the man might have wanted to also pursue further education or a hobby, and instead would prioritize the family. And children and family were often considered the goal of relationship. Now, if you fast forward to modern times, the 2020s, we're talking 60, 70 years later, you see that gender roles have really eased. We have legal homosexual marriage and gay marriage now. And we don't necessarily, the woman might be the breadwinner. There's a lot more acceptance of cohabitation. There's less social pressure for marriage. Divorce has been normalized. And nowadays we are prioritizing our personal happiness and satisfaction over the relationship. So people will divorce if they feel they could be happier outside of the relationship. And children and family are optional. So this is a huge change on, some pretty important social foundations for relationship. And when I started to kind of ask myself, what are some of the things that changed the dynamics between men and women? Well, of course, in the 1960s, it was actually 1960 that the Federal Drug and Food and Drug Administration legalized and approved birth control. And that really did start a revolution. Because when women had control of their reproduction, they had more choices. At the same time, in the 1960s through the 1990s or so, the percentage of women in the workforce doubled. So if you looked in the 1950s, maybe women were about 30% of our workforce, and most were at home. Now, over half of the workforce is women. So that's a huge change. If women have the means to support themselves, the kind of breadwinner homemaker foundation of relationship has been altered. So we really are in the process of a revolution. We're really undergoing a revolution. And I think it's important for us to think about relationship in the larger context. So there are these social and economic changes that have occurred that have changed the basis, the power dynamics and the basis for couples' relationships. And on top of that, we have the kind of more near influence of family and culture. And those things also influence our relationship. And then we can talk about communication and individual skills. It's just important to realize that when people come with an issue, there's a lot of different things that are in the foundation that are driving that issue. So it's important for us to kind of keep that in perspective. So just to kind of summarize this, then and now. In the 1950s, relationships were largely externally enforced. So social, religious, and cultural norms drove a lot of people's behaviors. And now in the 2020s, relationships are largely internally enforced. So it's our own agreements and the negotiations that we have with each other that have to hold us together. In the 1950s, if you were skillful at your particular gendered role, if you were a good homemaker or a good breadwinner, that was defined as success, not necessarily your personal happiness in the relationship. Now, in the 2020s, both parties are, breadwinners and homemakers. Like there's, although women still do more of that work, men are doing a lot more of that. And so there's a difference in terms of how we negotiate those roles. There's not a clear-cut boundary. So we need other skills. We need things like negotiation and repair and how to bring a complaint in a way that supports the relationship, who's doing things fairly and who's not. And so it's quite a different relationship that we're having to take care of in the 2020s. We don't have those external forces and supports and limitations. The other thing that's different between the 1950s and the 2020s is in the 1950s, the external appearance of success often took precedence over internal satisfaction in the relationship. And nowadays, people will divorce if they feel they are too unhappy in a relationship. So our personal happiness is taking precedence over a relationship. So it's really a whole sea change. So if we look at that middle hat box here, the culture and family also continue to have a big impact on the relationships that people have. And every family has its own rules around belonging, how we manage give and take, social order. All of these things affect individuals in relationship. There's a culture, that each person comes in, and families have their own culture. So, and there's expectations. When do you introduce the girlfriend or the boyfriend? To whom do you introduce them? Do you introduce them? These are all things that are kind of embedded in our cultural expectations. And couples can have different sets of expectations there coming from kind of different cultures, which can also lead to conflict. That's not communication. That's a difference in terms of what we think is appropriate in a relationship. And all families and all cultures have hidden rules of belonging. They have hidden rules of membership. And if you violate those rules, then there's trouble. You may not even know there's a rule there until you violate it. And I'll give a little example. I had a couple that I worked with where she came from an Asian culture where saving face was really important. Nobody stood out. He came from a very American culture, very individualistic. And so when it came time to give gifts, the rules of her family were you keep it modest, nobody does anything that would show that they're wealthier or more successful than anyone else. We keep everybody at the same level. And his family tradition was like, if somebody really needs something and you can get it for them, you get it for them. And so one time he bought a really lovely tool for one of the members of the family and got in trouble for it because he didn't follow the rules of her family. And this is a really common situation. It doesn't even have to be a different, country. Even within our families, we can have really different rules. So we're navigating all of that. I found that family constellations can show the foo factor, the family of origin factor, pretty easily. We can see on a constellation if there's some kind of outside interference in the couple. So that's one way we can see that. And if we're dealing with culturally sensitive issues, we can learn to have certain kinds of conversations that don't make anybody's culture wrong, but help us explore and work with the differences. So all of these are factors that are at the foundation of relationship. It's not quite as simple as we'd like to think it is. It's just, if you would do the right thing, everything would be fine. It's like, it's not just up to the individual. So modern relationships have transferred a lot of the support systems from the outside to the inside of the relationship, which means that the members of the couple need to know more. They need to have more skill. They need to have more know-how in order to make their relationship work and hold together. So some of the things that we have to be able to do in modern relationships to keep a relationship together are create and maintain fair agreements, right? Where do the dirty socks go? Is it outside of the hamper or in the hamper, right? Who takes care of the kids' dental appointments? Who doesn't? Which house do we go to for the holidays? These are all things that have to be negotiated. We have to negotiate these differences, and we have to make and keep agreements. There's research by John and Julie Gottman that showed that 2/3 of the things that couples fight about, and I call these squabbles, are just differences. They're these kinds of differences. And when couples can't make them work or can't accommodate them, then what happens is we build up resentment, and that resentment becomes a grudge, and the grudge becomes kind of a negative lens that we see our partner through, and that usually is the beginning of trouble. So another skill we have to have is we need to be much better at self-regulating, and we need to have self-compassion. And what we're learning about self-compassion is that it's actually the foundation of self-esteem. So if you're kind to yourself, you're more likely to be kind to your partner. You're more likely to be able to regulate yourself when you get upset. And if we're going to negotiate differences and handle those squabbles and keep agreements, we need to be able to do this. So we need to be able to repair if there's been a rupture. We need to be able to recover if we've experienced hard times. We don't have this, many of us don't have the surrounding family resources or church resources that we had to draw on to support us. It has to be done inside the couple. Another thing that's really important, especially with those differences that we're negotiating, is to have a positive bias, to find the positive. And there's some recent studies that show, I think it was Helen Fisher that I heard this from, who's an anthropologist that researches relationships. She found that one of the things that they found when they asked couples who are still in love after many years, still madly in love with each other, is that they tended to see their partner with rosy-colored glasses. They tended to kind of minimize some of the negative and really search for the positive. And that helped them stay connected. So, and also staying connected, like we need to touch bases every day, and our partners change and things happen. If we stay connected, we're more likely to stay together. Modern marriages, without the external pressure to get married, have kids, and have a family, we have to create a common purpose. We need to have a shared direction. We need to have a way to be on the bus together. At the same time, we can't ask our partner to provide everything for us. We need to maintain a sense of self. We need to have some friends and hobbies so that we have some other resources to draw on, so our partner isn't completely the one that carries us. We have to be able to let go of past complaints, be able to live in the present, have fun, and there's still even other skills. But that gives you an idea of what we're up against in modern relationships. It's not a lightweight thing. It's a lot. And we don't have the kind of scaffolding we had before. We also have more freedom, right? We're not in limited roles. So I would like you to take those 3 objects that you have, and I'm going to reset my little peoples here. And I want you to set up a little bit of a constellation. So first you're going to take whatever object you have to represent yourself, and whatever object you have to represent your partner. That's the you, my partner. And it can be a current partner, it can be a previous partner, relationship you'd like to explore. And I want you just to take these 2 objects, and I want you to assign them a nose, because people have fronts and backs, and it matters if we can see each other or if we're looking away, or we can touch or we can't. And I want you to find a place, like where does it feel like you stand in relationship to that partner? Are you close? Are you far? Do you see eye to eye? Do you not see each other at all? Where do you stand? And so take a moment and you can pause the video if you'd like, and just find the arrangement that feels right. It's kind of a gut feeling. And then once you've done that, I want you to take that other object, the relationship, and I want you to kind of find the place that it is between you. Who is most responsible for tending the relationship? And I want you just to kind of feel where the weight of that position is, and place that object there. And then once you've done that, I want you just to take a look at that and see what it feels like. Notice your feelings. Now I'm going to have you step through a series of the dimensions, the different aspects of relationship that we have to tend. And I want you to continue to move that relationship object and the other 2, me and my partner, if you need. So I want you to think about who between you is most responsible for happiness, for emotional regulation. Who tends to that the most? And just make that adjustment. Who tends to emotional regulation? And just notice what that feels like to see that. And then I'm going to have you ask the same thing about who tends the most to the financial security of the relationship, and where does the relationship, the weight of the relationship, stand relative to the 2 of you when you think about financial security. And go ahead and set that up. And just notice what that feels like. Notice your response. And now the next one is I'm going to invite you to think about who is most responsible for the care of the children, the pets, the home. And go ahead and make that image. Go ahead and set that up. And notice how that feels. And then who is most responsible for the future, for determining the goals that you have as a couple and the path forward? Who does most of that kind of long-term planning and thinking about, if you do, where you guys stand and whose job that is? And finally, who does the decision making when it comes down to heavy-duty decisions? Which one of you is more likely to be the one that makes the final call? And now just take a moment and notice what it's like to have kind of worked your way through some of these main things and kind of figured out where the responsibility lies between you and how you feel about that. And in the webinar, I ask people to share, their responses. So just to kind of give you an idea of the kinds of responses people had. One person said she's noticing an imbalance. Another couple said they feel like they were fairly evenly balanced, mostly equally shared. Another person said it feels good to acknowledge these underlying differences are there but not looked at. And her emotional response was stronger to some of these issues rather than others, and it surprised her. And another person said, we have different perspectives, different perceptions of these imbalances. There are imbalances, and we can feel them and experience them differently. Another person said, I'm experiencing an imbalance, but I'm afraid of showing my feelings to my partner. Not sure how they would handle that. And another one said, I felt good on the financial, they're doing more. We both did emotional. I do the home front, they do the goals, we do both. So they kind of divvied it up, and it felt like a fair set of, dividing things, dividing the responsibilities. Fairness is a really important dimension in modern relationships. And actually, even our primate kin, even I think they've done some lab rat tests, a lot of creatures can feel if something is unfair, and we're not an exception to that. And those resentments can feel quite strong. They can become quite strong. So these are things that also need to be negotiated. We need the skill and the ability to discuss these things before they become resentments and grudges, and to be able to resolve these issues in ways, or at least accommodate them in ways that lets the relationship thrive and survive. So I'm going to put back this question here and a new one. I want you to think about, what is the single most important thing that needs to be fixed in relationships today? What are the foundational things we need to be looking at? And what skill, if you could go into a candy store and on the shelves of this candy store were all the skills one could possibly want, like what skill would have helped your relationship the most? And you can go get it. So those are some things to think about. From our participants, they said the most important thing was give and take, finding balance. Another person said clarifying assumptions. Another person said, how do we both get our needs met, and how do we create those clear agreements? Another person said understanding each other, where each other is coming from. Another person said compassion, curiosity, being interested in why the other person's doing what they're doing. Another person said patience, just to get through it, right? And finally, another person said expanding our capacities and dealing with our limitations, getting beyond the idea of needs and expectations, but taking what we can and being giving, and looking at what's possible. So these were the kinds of comments that people shared on that question. Part of the reason for offering this webinar is that I have thought about this for years, and I finally got so tired of repeating myself with couples and teaching people over and over again the same skills. I thought, why not put this into a course, and why not make it something that people can get themselves? So we've put together a 5-course program to boost your relationship mastery. And there are, like I said, there's 5 courses in it. So the first course is called Relationship Myth Busting, which is a little bit of what I'm doing right now, which is to actually show you there's a lot more here, and the assumptions that you have, the simple models, love conquers all, these kinds of models don't actually help us get satisfaction. They oftentimes create problems. So our first module, which is a daily, it's 5 little lessons spread over 5 days. It's kind of to shake up your ideas about relationship. It's called Relationship Myth Busting. And that's the first course. The second course is, are we on the same bus? So often we don't get down to the level where we're really examining, where are you going? And we're like both in a canoe, but we're paddling differently and in different directions, and then blaming the other person for being so obtuse. So the second course really helps clarify values and needs, and helps us have conversations around, where are we going? And are we both on the same bus? Do we want the same thing, or are we really dealing with a conflict? And, sometimes there's a deal breaker down there. Someone really wants a kid and another person doesn't, and you can't have half a kid. You can't compromise there. So, someone wants to live overseas and spend their life there and someone doesn't. So it's important for us to actually get that foundation stable before we try the communication skills. The third course is communication skills. It's how to make a complaint and not damage the relationship, or how to repair if there's been a breach. It's just a set of communication tools, how to really do inquiry in a way where you really get deeper with your partner and get more intimate and have conversations over things that are generative. The fourth course is, even with those communication skills and even being on the same bus, we can still get into unwanted repeating patterns, and we can still have a couple of difficult topics, maybe some of those almost, but maybe not quite deal breakers, where we feel strongly about different things. We need to have some special tools to deal with difficult conversations. So the fourth course gives you those. The final course, the fifth course, is called Enhancing Joy. And it's about, okay, we can talk to each other, we're negotiating well, we've got things in place. How do we really bring joy and fulfillment into our relationship? So that's kind of like the reward for getting the skills you need to do the other things. So that's the course. The less courses 2 through 5 each have 5 lessons, but they drop weekly because there's specific skills that you get in those courses, and we want you to practice. So right now, there's the link, the tiny.cc, and it's ESC for Enhancing Skills for Couples, 2024 LP is for the landing page. And we hope that you will consider joining us. If you use the code LAUNCH3 right now, LAUNCH3, you'll get 25% off the first course. And we are taking the first group together as a cohort. So on Saturdays and Mondays, I'm available. There's a noon on Saturdays and a 4 p.m. on Mondays. There's an open hour kind of like for discussion and conversation about the topics and what people are learning. After we've gotten through this first cohort, then the course becomes a self-directed learning course. And we've selected a really fun classroom platform. It's a gamified platform, so it's got points and bonuses, and it's got a lot of fun things in it, so that your learning is going to be fun and you'll be motivated to get through to the end. So I hope you'll consider joining us. The first cohort is going to launch on February 10th. So if you're interested, dive on over to this website and remember to use the Launch3 code. Thank you for listening, and I hope I have piqued your curiosity and thoughts and interest about the foundations of relationship.